round of applause for Mamoon and for Scott and for Jillian and all the CHRO staff for hosting it here tonight. Thank you so much.
Good to have you guys. Thank you for coming.
So Mamoon was our Executive of the Award winner 2 years back, so he's no longer reigning as the current Executive of the Year
that
winner.
burden off my shoulder.
That burden's off your shoulder.
We need to get some clarification here because he's been saying he is still the human resource executive.
Yeah,
And he has been hell to deal with, I will tell you.
I'm here to say that the reign of terror is officially over. We can move on.
I'll try.
But so thankful to have Mamoon as a champion of NHRA Los Angeles. So thankful to have CHRO as a member of our organization. You all do so much for the community. I know there were tours that were earlier today, and the feedback from all the people that went on the tours were actually blown away. They loved it, absolutely. So I don't know if we're doing a tour afterwards or not. Are we doing a tour afterwards, or are we not doing a tour afterwards? Is anybody interested in a tour afterwards? Maybe.
If we have interest, we will do it.
Okay.
Frank?
All right.
Got a handful. So if you don't mind, Frank? We had told him 7:30, but really it's going to be closer to 8. You good with that? All right, I'll pay you overtime, don't worry about it.
And Frank...
He's exempt.
Wait a minute.
He's exempt. Don't worry about it. He's exempt.
CFO speaks up.
Exactly. No.
Also, just props to Frank because one of our guests tonight was lost and stranded and it felt like another universe of CHRO. And he left, went to find her, hopped in the car with her, and then escorted her to this facility. So that is above and beyond, Frank. That is awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so now we're going to talk about the criticality and realities, this title, the criticality and realities of the CFO CHRO partnership, and it's actually launching a new segment that we're going to be doing within NHRA, which is going to be engaging finance, and we're going to do 1 or 2 events on an annual basis that's really going to take HR into like the finance space. And the first session that we're going to do in January is going to be on quality of earnings and getting an education and a 101 on how quality of earnings work when you're going through a merger and acquisition. So we're going to dive more into the finance side, which I think a lot of people, we've already done this for a couple of HR executive roundtables, and the feedback has been absolutely fantastic. So we want to start introducing finance more into the conversation within the CPO, the HR executive, and this is our lead into it, and I couldn't think of a better panel to take us there. So our official partner outside of CHRO is Best Buddies. If you are interested in partnering with Best Buddies, please reach out. We have a couple of our members, our corporate members, become partners with Best Buddies, and they've had nothing but fantastic things to say about the organization. They're our philanthropic partner, so we'd love for you to give back to that particular organization. We have a DEI council. We're taking on new people in the DEI space. We're changing things up in the DEI world within NHRA, so if you're interested in that, please reach out to me. And our partners, some of whom are here. Mitch Rufka, can you stand up from Rufka Recruiting? There he is. Our friends from Robert Half, are you all here? All right, there you are. Let's see, anybody else here? Lively. We have our new friend in Lively. Stand up. Laura from Lively. Paylocity, we have Nick Rayak here with us as well. There's Nick. Nick is tall, he doesn't have to stand up. And am I missing anybody on there? I think I am. Nicole Cam with Fisher Phillips. Nicole, right there. Can't do it without the sponsors. And then IMA. And I'm here with IMA. So
Nice.
There you go. Upcoming events, we have the Future Ready Culture with I4CP. It's actually going to be at the IMA office in Pasadena. Join us if you're available. It's going to be a fantastic event. That'll be our last in-person event of the year. And if you don't know who I4CP is, they're a research engine, think tank based company that focuses specifically on the HR executive space. They give us a lot of our data for our events. So when we're having conversations with them and those events are taking place, I love it because it's real tangible. It's not intangible conversations, right? You can take that data, you can sit down with your CFO, CEO, CAO, right? And you can speak to them about whatever topic it is that you're engaging, and you can show them bottom line results, which I think is huge for the HR space. Let's see, new member onboarding. Looks like this is gonna be Tuesday, November 12th. If you're a new member, please make sure you reach out to us so we can get that information over to you. And if you are not a member and you're interested in becoming a member, please reach out to me. Happy to talk to you more about that. And then our legal update. I guess that's our webinar, Nicole Cam with Fisher Phillips, and Hannah Swice will be leading that. So please join us December 3rd. We always have about 300, 400 people show up for that. That's a webinar. We have not yet moved that back to in-person. It just seems like we get more of a turnout for the webinar than we do the in-person event. I don't know what it is about lawyers early in the morning, Nicole. It's just not thrilling. NHRA membership, please join us. There's a hashtag up there if you're interested. And if you're interested in the HRCI, this is your opportunity to take that down. We can send that out to all those attendees later, but I'll pause here for a second so you can snag that information. And our panelists, which means I can stop talking. I've already introduced and spoken, about Mamoun Syed, SVP and Chief People Officer of CHLA. We have Darren Summers with the CFO of Vegamore. Did I pronounce that correct? Vegamore. Fail. I said your first name properly. Yes, Darren, not Darren. Jen Longdian. I've known Jen forever. I love Jen. She's lots of claim to fames, from Best Buy to Dollar Shave Club, and now she's running her own firm, C and Free Consulting. And then Scott with CHLA, our CFO representative of CHLA. So tonight's session is going to be moderated by Jen, and with that, I am going to find my way off the stage.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate you. I have known him a while, so it's very nice to be here and see some familiar faces and new faces in the audience, and I'm very privileged to be able to moderate this incredible panel in the beginning of this series on making sure that everybody knows our CFOs are not evil. That's what I call it. Yes.
We have our moments.
Yeah.
Right? Is that it? Yeah. No. So we tonight wanted to do something a little bit different, make it a bit casual, and so we're going to have an opportunity to have Mamoun and Scott show us what their banter is like on a daily basis as they wrestle to the ground some of the issues that they're facing as CFO and CHRO. And then Darren and I will do the same, and we bring kind of a unique perspective, having been in big corporate and startup land and both been in these roles. And so we thought this would be a fun way to engage everybody and talk about some of the things that are top of mind for these partnerships and why they're so important. So with that, Mamoun and Scott.
Thank you very much. Again, on behalf of CHLA, just so honored that all of you have come here tonight. Really happy to host this wonderful event with all of you here. I just want to thank Frank and his team again for offering the tour. That was wonderful. Thank you, Frank. And really tonight, the biggest round of applause to that lady to my left, Jillian, who just always works miracles to make these events happen at CHLA. So thank you, Jillian. When I was first offered this opportunity from Andrew, I thought, like, our CEO got a hold of him to serve as an intervention between the two of us. I think it's the closest we've ever sat in the 7 years I've been here. I didn't know his name until this program came out.
We're supposed to have a relationship? Oh my God.
We gotta fake this thing for one night. All right, no, actually we and I get along incredibly well. Yeah, he is the CFO with the biggest heart I've had anywhere I've worked. There are times in our executive meetings where people get confused who the HR executive and who the finance executive is. Because sometimes I'm pushing the money and he's like, what about the people? And it's like, okay, well, we're kind of flip that. So it's been great to actually partner with him, but none of that takes away how challenging this environment is. What we want to do very quickly first is give you a little profile about CHLA. So you can identify where there are commonalities with your organizations that you can relate with, but then also identify what are distinct from you that may not relate with some of our approaches and answers to this biggest challenge that we have. So if you want to talk a little bit about who we are.
I'm Scott Lieberens. I've been Chief Financial Officer here for 8 years now. And I spent most of my life in Texas and then a little bit in North Carolina. But CHLA is about a $1.8 billion company. The uniqueness of CHLA is that we serve a population or patient population that's 75% Medicaid. And so we're a top 10 children's hospital in the United States by U.S. News and World Reports. Newsweek actually ranks us, I think, as the number 4 hospital in the world. But of those top 10, we're the only ones that have a Medicaid population anywhere close to 75%. Most of them are around 55 or 60 at the most. And so it presents a lot of unique challenges, particularly in California, who has expanded Medicaid and covers everybody, but spreads that reimbursement over a whole lot of people. And so it makes it for a really difficult deal. We do about 17,000 surgeries a year. We have about 100,000 ED visits that come through our ED. About 8 to 10% of those end up in an inpatient visit. And then we've got 38 clinics on campus and 6 out in the community, and do a total of about 300,000 outpatient clinic visits at those. And so, big organization. I've been privileged to be here for the 8 years. The thing that makes it all work, if you go back several years ago, our clinical operation threw off a lot of cash flow, and we were able to fund our other 2 primary missions. We've got the clinical mission, and then we have a research mission and academic mission. And so we're affiliated with USC. Our faculty is all members of their practice over there. And then our research, and so we do about $70 million worth of NIH grants a year, and about $160 million, I think, of research total. And so what makes that all work now is that we also raise about $130 million a year in philanthropy from the local community and outside. And so we are extraordinarily blessed to have a great relationship with the community, because it's not possible without the philanthropy.
So with that, it sounds like we make a bunch of money every year, Scott, right?
Absolutely.
You want to talk a little bit about that, though? I think
I'll get into it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm jumping the gun. Let me give you a little profile about our workforce, so you have that context as well. We have just a little over 8,000 employees that work at CHLA. That actually includes our faculty that are not CHLA employees. As you mentioned, state of California hospital systems cannot employ their doctors. So we kind of work through another process where USC is their employer, but we kind of pay USC for their services, and USC ends up paying them. With them combined, we're a little over 8,000. Over the last 2 years, we've grown by about 13% in aggregate, so we're growing quite a bit. There's a lot of dynamics that cause that growth to happen, which we might talk about a little bit later. Simultaneously, our salaries over the last 2 years have grown by 27% in that same time frame period, and that's one of the reasons why we get along so well.
How did you let that happen?
How did I let that happen? I don't know. We're going to talk about that in just a second. I don't know how. I was falling asleep. All right. So our turnover rate 2 years ago was 12%. Now it's 11.5%. So we put a small dent in our turnover. I don't know how 12 and 11% kind of fares for your industries and your organizations, but in healthcare, it's actually one of the best in class, especially in pediatrics, because we are a pediatric hospital in a highly competitive, saturated market, where most other pediatrics are like the only shop in town. And the fact that they have a higher turnover when they're the only pediatric shop in town makes our turnover rates even better. So it's just kind of a really telling thing, and we can talk about that. 79% of our workforce are millennials or younger. 80% of our workforce are women. Let's see, I did that one already. 61% are minorities. 42% of our workforce has been here for less than 3 years, whereas 21% has been here for more than 15 years. Right, so it gets kind of bimodal workforce. So that's kind of high level, kind of a categorization of our workforce. So with that as context, I'll start asking you the first question, Scott. And it is, how do you as CFO balance the need for this financial sustainability in the model that we have with the pressures to make investments in our workforce in the way that we have? I just talked about salaries being around 26%. Yeah. There's a lot of other investments that we make that tag it up. How do you manage that?
Yeah, and it's I think for an organization, and one thing about CHLA that you see as soon as you get here is that there's no place I've ever been that has mission front and center. Everything we do, there's a old saying that we used to have a chairman of the board that would go around and tell people, don't worry about the money. Take care of the patients. The money will take care of itself. And I will tell you, in a lot of ways, we believe that. I mean, it is what's best for the patient. We have several things out there that we do that we may get $15,000 or $18,000 of reimbursement, and the implant that we're putting into the kids $60,000, or the drug we're using is $55,000 or whatever it is. And so it's a real balance. I'll tell you that we went through a period of time as the pediatric nurses, I think nurses all over California started kind of leaving the markets. We were in a position where we had to figure out how to staff beds, and we were making decisions around hiring temporary staffing agency nurses that for about $200 to $210 an hour. And when I got here, one of the things we really focused on was reducing the kind of the agency staffing, and we got it down to I think about 45 or something like that. But they were at a reasonable rate. When you got 200 of them at $210 an hour, it's tough when you're 75% Medicaid. And I'll tell you that it's a huge balance. The thing about our CEO, Paul Viviano, who is an outstanding guy to work for, he would rather lose money on a patient than have a patient get turned away from CHLA. And we treat the sickest kids in the state. If you look at the really high acuity kids, I think we have 58% of the market statewide. If something happens at CHLA, nobody's there to take care of the kids. And so that's something that we live every day. And it's a balance. I mean, you make choices, whether it's capital choices or choices around staffing or which programs you want to try to open up and stuff. It's a big balancing act. Paul uses the term that we kind of defy gravity, and we do in a lot of ways, and that you just don't see hospitals like ours that are able to operate with 75% Medicaid. You got the next question? I'm
Well, have at it.
All right.
Put me on the spot, man.
One of the things we were talking.
I am executive of the year.
I know you are. I know. You remind me every day. So one of the things that we are dealing with in healthcare, starting in I think it's 2026, something called the Office of Healthcare Affordability, which is a California regulatory body who is going to limit growth in healthcare expenses to, I think it starts off at 3.5% a year and drives down to 3% a year. And so my question for Mamoon is, when you talk about 16 and 18% salary increases over 2 years, how the heck are we going to staff a hospital?
This is, we're not.
We're not.
That's the reality. We can say that the state has the best of intentions in terms of trying to curb healthcare costs. I understand it. Healthcare costs are ballooning and they're out of control. I don't disagree with that. However, these kind of measures I think, are so short-sighted. Or they're driven by specific lobbying groups, which is my sense here, that there's two very specific lobbying groups who actually come out smelling like a rose as a result of this. That's going to happen. It's going to make it very, very challenging to be able to compete for talent. We're already seeing the healthcare industry being decimated in rural America, right? Because just the financial model doesn't work. So many hospitals are closing out. And this is just going to make it into the urban setting here in California, where it's just going to be financially impossible for healthcare to sustain itself financially with these kind of pressures. And then you limit our ability to compete for limited talent, right? Because the talent fight that we're having is not just LA or California, it's the entire country. It's not even America, it's the entire globe. We are forced to recruit internationally. And I live with that kind of moral weight, because now it just decimates other countries' healthcare system. But that's what you got to do to be able to take care of our children here. And then also when you're competing, you are predominantly, when you're recruiting, because they haven't experienced our culture, you're predominantly competing on compensation and benefits. And even it's not even benefits, it's compensation, it's their salary. And it's just a race to the bottom when the talent is the way it is. It just makes it so unsustainable. And when you have the state limit your growth to 3 to 3.5% in overall expenses, and our expenses are what, 70% staff salary?
It's 65 and 70%.
65 to 70%. I mean, we're such a people-intense industry with what we do that all of that 3% is coming from staff salaries, right? And so I don't know what inflation is going to be 3 to 5 years from now, but I think it's going to be more than 3%. Yeah. So nobody's going to stick around.
Yeah, and then I don't know how much you all listen or read about the pipeline of these genetically engineered drugs that are out there right now. Yeah. But we're giving patients $3.5 million drugs that are given on an outpatient basis, an infusion. curative. I mean, you can cure anywhere from a muscular atrophy to anemia, all these things, but it's still a hugely, it's great for the patient, great outcomes, and it is extraordinarily expensive. And how the industry, and not just the state of California, but the federal government's going to handle those and pay for them, I have no idea. It's going to be a difficult time.
Because right now, how much are we getting reimbursed for that $3.5 million?
On an outpatient basis, we'll actually get the full cost of the drug to us. But if something happens to the patient and they revert to an inpatient stay, then we're going to eat the vast majority of that cost. So.
All right, so how do you see your role evolving as a chief financial officer, especially as it relates to all these talent challenges that we're confronting in the next few years, especially given the fact that we're not-for-profit?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very difficult role. I think the collaboration, especially with us, with 65 or 70%, and that number is probably going to go up, of our salary being people. I think the relationship between my office and Mamoon's office, and it's not just Mamoon and I, it is a whole group of people that work for us, is going to be critical. And it's it's a give and take. I mean, Mamoon and I and our cabinet is a very close group and make a lot of decisions on a cabinet basis. And as we went, particularly looking through COVID, there were decisions that we were making that, from a financial standpoint, I will say, make no sense at all. But at the same time, you've got to serve the kids, and so it's like, all right, well, we're going to make these decisions now, and somewhere down the line there'll be a price to pay for those decisions, and we'll deal with those when they come up. But it is, I'll tell a little bit of a story. When the pandemic started, Mamoon and I were reflecting a little bit about this today. The pandemic hit on March 14th, I think, and so Friday the 13th, and then Saturday was the 14th. But a week after that, the cabinet was meeting. We meet on Monday mornings, and it was clear at that point that the crap was going to hit the fan. I mean, our volumes had gone from our inpatient census, I think that the night of the 13th or the 12th probably was 365, and we were down to about 227 in a week and a half. And so we were sitting there, and the discussion with the cabinet was probably one of the proudest points of my career, because it was immediately, how do we take care of our employees in a safe work environment? And we came up with something we called Safer at Home, which was, we knew we were going to have to staff down the levels of our staffing because we didn't have patients to take care of. We gave every employee 80 hours worth of free time so they keep their paychecks whole. We did a whole bunch of stuff like that throughout those early weeks, and it was amazing at how quickly we were able to make those decisions, and it was neat. So. Okay, so let me get to my second question here. My eyes are getting terrible. So obviously, as we go in the healthcare industry, as we're proceeding in the healthcare industry, our ability to continue to significantly increase salaries is going to be limited. What are some of the things that CHLA is doing to increase retention of our employees that may not have immediate financial benefit, but lead them to want to stay at CHLA?
Yeah, I mean, this is what HR said. We've got to solve this. So how do we compete beyond money? The challenge that we have with that competing beyond money is, if only a few of us do it and others don't, it's still going to create challenges for us to recruit and retain. One of the biggest things that we have the ability to do that kind of almost solves itself is our mission, right? We have clinicians or even non-clinicians that drive by at least a dozen different places where they can work through LA traffic, just to work at CHLA. I myself, as some of you know, commute from San Diego to come work at CHLA. That's how much I love this place. And the work that we do is just remarkable. That it's worth it. It's worth the commute. Now I don't drive it, I actually take the train, which makes it a tad bit better. But it's still insane, right? It's still kind of an insane thing, but we've got thousands of our team members that do that because of our mission. So that, thankfully, is still resonant. It's still really powerful. And that also is not enough. With inflation the way it's been and people trying to make ends meet, there's only so much that a mission can drive you. So we, again, still have to compete financially. But leadership quality is probably number one, not less. Our leadership's ability to directly engage with their workforce. Right? We're a healthcare organization in the city of LA that's still not unionized. Right? Our ability to continue to work directly with our staff is also part of our defying gravity moment. And it's not that unions haven't tried. They have tried. We would be a feather in a union's cap, and have they ever tried? But we've been able to do it primarily because of how great our leadership team is. Obviously, on the benefits front, is also something that we try to offer unique benefits. One of the things that we've done actually in the last 3 years, trying to figure out, do we provide fertility benefits or increase tuition reimbursement or provide daycare, all of it, right? When you try to individualize benefit and you try to make all of it available, it's really inflationary. So you got to pick, and we have a limited pool of dollars. So one of the things we did, I think it's helped us short term. It will be a risk for us long term. As we said, we're not going to invest in any of those and just put it in people's paycheck and let them figure out how they're going to do it, which is one of the reasons why our increases were at 26%, because we just kept saying we're not going to invest in these benefits so that everybody can decide what they want. Again, that worked for the last 2-3 years with the talent market stabilizing a little bit. We're going to have to compete on benefits, and now it's going to be kind of the Faustian bargain that we're going to have to confront. But it's all those other factors, having a culture and environment where people feel that they belong, they're involved, their wellness, right? Healthcare burnout is through the roof. That's why so many healthcare workers are leaving. How do we support their their wellness so they don't burn? I mean, it's all of these factors is kind of how we compete.
So do we want to go, or do
I know we have a
turn it
couple of
over?
more questions, but I think in the interest of our time and what we're trying to manage, we'll turn it over to the two of you and then make sure that we have enough time to engage the audience.
Any questions now before we?
Yeah, thank you.
Anything that burning to ask? Okay. All right, we'll save them, please. So yeah, it's our turn. I feel like
I'm not sure how we're
we
gonna
have to
follow
step up. So Darren is going to talk a little bit about kind of the setup and explain how we know each other, and a little bit about Vegamore.
Yep, sounds good. So it's very humbling hearing the challenges that you gentlemen face. I think Vegamore's, we're in the beauty industry. It's definitely not healthcare, which obviously the burden is much higher. But our mission at Vegamore is really to destigmatize women's hair loss. So I think there are so many women out there who suffer with thinning or shedding, particularly postpartum, or when you're menopausal, and it's not really spoken about. So our mission is to really just help educate people on that it's a thing, and help women get through that journey with some of our products. So yeah, we're definitely not in the billions, we're more in the millions. But those challenges around kind of how you think about that relationship between HR and finance are super important to us as well. So, and just for some background, so Jen and I have been working together for the last year or so. Yeah. We both come from like a big corp background originally. I used to work for Unilever in the UK. Jen used to work for Coke and Best Buy, loads of great big brands. And about a year ago, we were getting to this point in our journey of, we need to take a step back and rethink about our strategy and do some reorganization. And Jen has been a phenomenal asset to us during that time. Her ability to kind of help us take a step back, challenge our thinking, and also to help us with being our interim CMO and COO. So she wears many hats really well. But yeah, and it turned out we were both hovering around Dollar Shave Club, which I'm sure some of you have heard of, at around about the same time. So it's been great working together.
You would think we would know each other better. Unilever bought Dollar Shave Club. We probably met at one point, just don't remember. Yeah. So so as Darren said, we've been in each other's orbit for a little bit in different capacities. We wanted just to have a casual conversation, but we thought about our experience of being in these seats in different environments. And our primary takeaway is that, yes, this relationship is super important, but probably even more important is the triangulation of these two roles with your CEO. And I certainly saw that as an OD practitioner for many years in big corporations, and certainly sitting in the seat. It is a critical relationship, and when you have that perfect kind of triad and alignment with your CEO, it's even stronger. And so we both thought about, how can we talk about that? At just the time I've been working with Vegamore, there's been 2 CEOs in the last year, and a bit of a transition. And we have our HR team here, Mallory and Ricky, and it's been an interesting transition to manage and figure out, how do we help set a vision? How do we help this organization scale? When do we contemplate pivoting, and under what conditions? All of those things have come up as the organization has had these conversations. So Darren and I thought, why don't we talk about 3 points in the people/business cycle where these two roles need to talk to each other more, really connect, get aligned, and then, how do we think we need to be thinking about that in the future as we evolve these roles going forward. So with that, Darren, I think just to tee up, what are those 3 conversations we think are really important? You want to share?
Yeah, so for us, if you think through the people life cycle, when we're thinking about recruitment, for me, it comes down to resource allocation. I'd love to say yes to every hiring request, and I'm sure it's the same for you guys as well, but obviously our resources are finite, so how do we think about that as a CFO? What's front of mind for me? Then when it comes to a big part of our role as CFOs is obviously planning and forecasting. So we'll think about how does retention and planning kind of marry up together. And then I think the third pillar for me of the CFO role is really about performance management. So then when it comes to kind of how do you performance manage on an organization level and on an individual level, how do you, as a finance person, think about that process?
Yeah. So let's start with that one. Let's start with resource allocation. So what does the CFO care about in that moment, and how would you like to see that go down?
Yeah, so I think we all know every organization's resources are limited. And obviously, again, for us, it's nothing like the kind of choices that we're having to make on a healthcare side of things. But ultimately, hours are short. There's never enough time. There's never enough people. There's never enough money. And as a CFO, my job is to make sure that we're generating the best possible return on the resources we deploy as we can. So really the way I always think about it is there's 3 things that you can consider when you're choosing how you're going to deploy your resources. It's quality, so how well is it going to do the job I need it to do? It's about time and speed, how quickly can I get that resource in, and how quickly will it generate a return? And obviously cost, so what's the most efficient way for me to think about getting that resource in? And typically you can't have all 3 of those things together. So a lot of CEOs that I've worked with in my time always think, yeah, of course, we'll get someone who's brilliant really quickly and they'll be super low cost, it's easy. And then as finance and HR, it's our job to kind of educate them on, maybe we can have 2 of the 3, which two are most important. So when I think about recruitment, for me, you kind of have to start with what's the real need for the role. Particularly when someone leaves and you're backfilling, I think everyone just assumes, we just need to get someone in straight away. But it's always a good chance, me being a bit cynical, to say, what's that person really doing? What KPIs are they influencing? First of all, do we really need that activity to be done? Then thinking about, okay, so if we need that person, what's the KPI that they're driving? So are they here to drive up customer satisfaction? Is it product quality? Can we measure it? Can we make sure we're clear on the impact they're having? And then also thinking about what's the best way to then bring that resource in. So is it temp staff? Tends to be more expensive, but you can get them more quickly. Is it an agency, someone totally external, or are you going to bring in a new hire? So yeah, and I think from a finance perspective, we're juggling the ball of all of those balls of how do we, I need to spend more money on marketing. My ops lead is telling me I've got a load of inventory that I need to buy. How do we partner with HR to make sure that the business has the resources it needs to be successful? Is really what it comes down to.
Yeah. And I think I would concur with everything you said. I think it starts for me with strategy. So are we all clear? What are we trying to do here? And what really makes us competitive? And I think that gets to, do we really need this role right now? And is this the role where we want to make the big investments? And with limited resources, how do we think about that? And then when we make those investments, how much are we going to pay for them? On that talent front, to your point, I think you mentioned earlier too, like how do you manage your peers' expectations? I find, right? These 2 roles often have to be the parents, I feel like, and I've been referred to that often in these roles. But talking about, how do you manage the I need my right now? It's really, really important. And how do you kind of set them in their place a little bit when it comes to, yes, you do need that role, and so does so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so. And so it's a negotiation because we only have a certain amount of money that we can invest. And so we talked a little bit about that too and how important it is. And I think just pacing. Darren and I talked a bit about, what is the plan for growth? Do we have an alternative if we don't hit that plan? And having this conversation about, under what current conditions or circumstances do we need to pivot? If we have upside, where would we spend that money and what talent? If we're flat, what does that mean? And then if we have some downside, let's not make it so that we find ourselves at a point of layoffs or major reductions because we've been backed into a corner, right? And really getting out ahead of those conversations. And just anecdotally, because I tell Andrew, he only invites me for entertainment. So at Dollar Shave Club, I started on the same day as the CFO. And they were 3 years in. So already 3 years in, and then here come mom and dad. We both had 30-minute orientation, sign your handbook. And I was like, okay, I've never done HR before, but let's go for this. And what was fascinating, we were employees 70 and 71, but there were 65 roles open at the time. 18 recruiters. Every department had their own favorite recruiter. He was looking at a situation. This was March when we started, Scott, and they hadn't balanced the books from the prior year. Just gone through Series C funding, and he was like, I have no idea how off plan we are. And I'm thinking, well, I've got 65 open roles over here that they want to, and we both had to have these moments of do we pause? Do we stop for a second and say hey, hold up, what is the plan here? And then come to realize there was none. Really, and from a budgeting perspective, the teams didn't have budgets. I mean, they've been flying by the seat of their pants and making a lot of money and doing some great work, but it was a lot to kind of slow them down and say, hey, let's look at this and be objective about it as we go forward. So we really think when you have these resource conversations, it is so critical that these roles are aligned and go after it that way. So the second conversation we talked about was planning and forecasting.
One's favorite.
Yeah.
So I think from my perspective as a CFO, I think there's a great quote from Mike Tyson, which is everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, which is very, very apt. So you can't do enough scenario planning as a CFO. If things are going well, what are we going to do with the money? If things are going badly, how are we going to recover profit? It's a constant game of scenario planning. So from what I'm looking for from my HR partner is really as much transparency as possible. It's very, very hard. As a CFO, you have to build a plan that's giving your stakeholders confidence we can get to our goals, but at the same time, you're the one that's got to be pragmatic, you've got to be thinking about risk. So it's a pretty tricky position to be in. So from a HR perspective, I think if I don't know about the plan to give everyone a 10% cost of living increase until a month before, it means all of my scenarios are just to rip up and start again. So I think from a planning perspective, as a CFO, I'm really relying on that strong partnership with my HR lead to make sure we have an aligned view on what's happening next year. And from a retention perspective, I think making sure we've got a strong talent management process, so we get ahead of flight risks. And we agree those guardrails up front. If someone comes and says, look, unless you give me A, B, C, I'm leaving, how are we going to deal with that? And also, where's our line in the sand? So even if you've got a top talent, I think you have to align on where's the walk-away point as well. So I think really just making sure that we're in lockstep when it comes to that conversation is really key. But what's your perspective on it, Jen? Because from an HR lens, it's more about you're expected to have the right team in place. It's not always about making sure we're planning ahead. So
I think the thing I've come to realize coming from, again, massive corporations where we were planning 10, 20 years out, and coming to startups where there is no plan. And that contrast is just first off, what is the plan? And I think one of the things I've been reflecting on is in the last several years, pandemic and then post-pandemic, best laid plans were not delivered, right? And so I've seen a reticence from a lot of founders and CEOs to actually say, this is where we're going, aspirationally, where we want to go, and really nail that down with conviction so that you can, forecast, that you can have a conversation about what the organization wants to do. And the VCs and PE firms, I don't think, are making it any easier because a lot of them are cutting off their runway. And so, if there's some sort of weird initiation, like it's your turn to lay off some people and show that you are, worthy to lead this company. So I see it creating a very interesting dynamic. So plans, even if we got people to a place of wanting to do those plans, I think the resistance is there because people are scared. I mean, they're scared to put a stake in the ground. And I think from my perspective, one of the controversial conversations you and I had about this is that I feel oftentimes CFOs are invited to the table to have those conversations and CHRs aren't always there. And so I told Darren, I said, I think that's one of the things is make sure that, the CHRO and the head of HR is with you, because I think a lot of times the CFOs are in there having those conversations, thinking about what's forecasted and what's not, and what's needed, and then we get here, we need you to go hire X number, here's the hiring forecast or whatever, and so how do we make sure that that doesn't happen? Now, Darren doesn't do that, but other CFOs I have worked with do. Yeah, other CFOs do that. But we talked about like how important that is to have that alignment because it's super critical. Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about this last piece because we talked about performance management. So broadly, kind of business performance, people performance. Why is this an important conversation for us to have?
So I think it comes back to that piece around, as a CFO, I'm responsible for making sure we're generating a good return. And so if, first of all, you need to make sure you've got super clear KPIs and metrics that are measurable so you can actually understand if the business or the organisation is performing. So half the time that's the first battle. Is the data accurate? Are the calculations correct? Can I even measure this thing that we're doing? But then, obviously, if you're not hitting your goals and targets, I think the CFO's role is primarily to be like, let the root cause investigator. So what's going on here? Is it an external issue? Is it that our plan was unrealistic? Is it that there's a process blocker? Trying to kind of figure out and narrow down what's the actual issue. And that's where I think that relationship with HR, again, is super critical, because if it's an individual performance problem, that's why I'm really relying on my HR partner to give me some insight that, is this actually a individual performance problem or is it outside of their control? So I think it's absolutely critical to make sure you can measure performance ultimately. But then as a CFO, it's also very easy to jump to the route of, well, then I just need to replace and upskill. But I think what's really important is making sure you give an individual or a department a real kind of glide path to recover, whether that's we rebase the target, whether that's there's additional resources that they need, whether it's their line manager might not be giving them the coaching and the feedback they need to they might not even know they're not performing. So as a CFO, I always have to check myself to say the answer isn't always just about change. It's about giving a person a chance to prove they can do it before you get to that point.
Yeah, we were talking about that today, and just we have Vegamore has channels, Sephora, Amazon, and direct to consumer. I'm a member, by the way. 6 months, so you guys tell me. Was that good? It was good, yeah. One of the things we were talking about is like if those channels are not performing, is that a business issue potentially? Like especially if we're having churn in those roles, like how do we know that it's truly a capability issue? Maybe it's a capacity issue. We're just putting too much onto those channels. Like we're spreading ourselves too thin across these priorities. Or potentially it is a willingness issue, and those are the more challenging ones to solve for when you have somebody that just doesn't want to do the job as described. But are we willing to call that out, have those tough conversations, and make sure that we're not putting the albatross of business performance on like one or two people to carry for the organization? And so we talked a lot about that today, even in the context of our current conversations. I think the other thing I thought about here is, and we talked about this as well, retention. Because even when you have performance and you have great performance and you want to keep people, and again you have limited resources, like how do the CFO and CHRO align on that, and like what's on offer, what will keep people? And I think both of us acknowledge like sometimes cash isn't it, especially we're seeing that with this generation. I have particular client that called recently, and they have an obscene amount of money. They just had a major transaction, $2.5 billion transaction. And so every employee is getting over $100,000 per month payouts right now in cash, and they're complaining. And so that HR leader, 100,000 a month. Yeah. But I was like, okay. And the HR leader was like very upset because she felt the employee base, like, what's wrong with them? Why are they bitter? Why are they not, why is this not motivating? And I said, well, it's largely a technology company. And I said, from what I know of software engineers, they like to build stuff. So if you're not giving them something to build, and there's not some evolution that this company is supposed to take, cash is not going to buy them off, right? They can go anywhere and make the cash, go after the next big transaction. And so it was this like, okay, then what do we do? And I'm like, I think you got to give them something to go build, like at the end of the day. But it's getting harder and harder to know what those motivators are. And we talked about, and you especially, he's a good CFO too, he cares. He said, why don't we ask them? What do we ask them what they want? What will motivate them? And taking the time to do that. So, yeah. So one of the things I thought we wanted to end on was just like, what does the CFO care about? We're in a room probably largely of HR leaders, and I wanted to hear Darren's perspective on what would create the love that you need to feel good about your role from all of these HR leaders.
The fact that you even asked me the question, it's like, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
So I think that the first main thing is that CFOs are people.
Scott, would you concur?
I'm checking for a pulse. Hold on. Damn, he is alive. What? I thought it was some AI robot here. Oh, thank you for that insight. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
But I think, there is a kind of a typical view out there, a stereotype that we're the bean counters, we're miserable, we love saying no, we love being bad cops. That's not really true. We do it when we have to, but what we really want to be doing is partnering with our other department leads to help add value for all of the stakeholders, whether that's patients, customers, investors, whatever it may be. And I think the payback for us as individuals tends to be like solving a problem, I think, for most CFOs, rather than just, I want to come in and tell you can't do that. So I think as an HR lead, just kind of remembering this, your CFO is just a person. I watched Married at First Sight. I'm happy the Dodgers made the World Series.
You did?
Let's chat about it. What did you think of whoever didn't get married? So just building that relationship around the lens of, regular touch points is really key. Being transparent. If you're seeing a problem emerging, talk to your CFO about it. They're going to want to help you and build a plan of how do we fix it. And I think building that kind of trust with your CFO is key. If you're both going to kind of try and usher the CEO towards a particular decision, if you're going to try and convince them, you can't have quality, speed, and low cost at the same time. Both of you having those moments where you can align, you can disagree and debate in public. The other way around, privately. But then in public, go with an aligned view. That's the way you want to get it done. Your CFOs don't really like being surprised. But I think if you have that conversation one-to-one, you're much more likely to get a good outcome. And I think the other thing really is just about ask for help. If you're not sure, I think particularly some finance terminology can be quite hard to understand and follow. And you've got to remember, we've done it for years. We've been trained. We've got qualifications. It's our bread and butter. So don't be afraid to ask. If you just want like a quick 101 of anything in the P&L terminology, we actually quite like it if you ask us. We're like, someone cares about what we do. So I think regular touch points, build a relationship, and building that trust is really important. But also just to remember that, trust is hard to earn, it's quickly lost. So making sure if you agree guardrails with each other on how you make decisions, things you don't commit to outside of that room, you've got to make sure you then follow up on it, because it's very hard to kind of build that relationship once that trust factor's gone. So, and talk about Married at First Sight, I think. That's probably a big one.
Married at First Sight.
Valerie and I do that all the time.
So there you go. That is the secret to creating a long-lasting, loving relationship with your CFO. Married at First Sight. So hopefully you've gathered from this conversation that we do think that this partnership is critical, and facing more challenges than ever before in very different contexts. And so with that, questions, please. Yes. Oh, Mitch.
Yeah. Hold on, she gave you a mic.
Yes, Mike.
Yeah. So make sure you push the button. You got it? Yeah. First of all, thank you. That was
Really
great.
we're talking about, come on.
Thank you all for that. I had a question for Mamoon and Scott. So you mentioned two areas that you focused on to kind of stay best in class with your workforce was benefits. You're putting money back in everyone's pockets. And you mentioned management and leadership. I was wondering if you could share an example of what you're doing management and leadership-wise to kind of stay best in class.
Yeah, a couple of things. We've got, one of the things for economies is that we don't outsource any of our development programs. We actually insource them because they just get much cheaper and cost effective and they actually work. So we have multiple layers of in-house leadership development programs. We've actually built in our own, so we've got it for early careerists, we've got it for high performing, and we've got a program that's kind of in the intermediary, that's by role, to create the collaborative partnership that we need to deliver on high clinical care. That's number one. The second thing that I think I've been really impressed our ability to do is actually build an in-house coaching program. Because as valuable as training is, coaching is just next level in terms of being able to help leaders go to the next level. Predominantly, we do peer coaching and group coaching, because that's again where the economies lie, although we do have targeted one-on-one coaching as well. And there are certain scenarios where we do outsource that, where it becomes critical, and the ROI we feel is worth it investing in that leader with outside coaching investments. But those are two big pieces that we do to help upskill our leaders on a regular basis.
Yeah, I would add too that I think in all those programs there's some type of mentor relationship
Yeah,
that we use. That I've got one of our programs for the senior leaders. I'm the direct mentor for those people, and some of those programs. How long has Velocity been going on?
Velocity is a 2-year program.
Yeah, but it's been going on for like
5 years.
Yeah.
5 years.
But I've got this people that I was mentors for during the program are still set up meetings with me once a month to sit down and chat about stuff. So I think it's an important part of it.
Touche.
Yeah, it's green, right? So, hi, my name's Shameen, and I'm curious to learn a bit more about, especially in HR. There's this big thing where we're all about data now. It's like all of a sudden, we can get all this data together. But from a CFO perspective, what sort of data or analytics have got you to a place of yes when an HR comes to you with the request? So how does HR tell a compelling story to a CFO?
You want to take it? Or you want
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think for me it just comes back to that piece of when there's a request for a backfill or a new hire, it's like, well, what's the metric and the KPI that person's going to be influencing? So, and sometimes it's not always easy to actually put a number on or a metric against someone's output. Like, think about like a brand marketeer, for example. It's very hard to actually say, well, what's the specific KPI that they're going to influence? But I think having an HR partner who understands the metrics that drive the other parts of the business is really important, and that way it's a lot easier for me to see the business case on why we need that role. But I think it's a really interesting, we were talking about this earlier as well, but I think thinking ahead as well, data analytics is only going to get increasingly important in that relationship.
Yeah.
And you take it a step further, you're kind of thinking about AI. I know it's a bit of a dirty word in a way, but the world of work and how the two functions operate together in the next 5-10 years will be completely different to today.
Yeah.
So I think having that strong relationship and understanding the activity drivers across the different functions now is so important, because I think HR and finance are going to be the functions that have to lead and navigate organizations through the AI revolution that's coming. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Data analytics is going to become increasingly important.
Yeah, I would add, I think the importance of a really good, like a business plan when you're trying to bring something, and something that's been stress tested. I will tell you there are so many great business plans out there, and about 80% of them are just flat out wrong. And I think that part of the CFO's role, and really I think anybody in finance and anybody in leadership is, how much this is a great scenario. How do things go in a good scenario? How does it go in a bad scenario? And can you unwind it? I mean, there's some things that we do that I don't think we could start, and it's very difficult to unwind a program, especially when you find a niche of kids that need some type of health service. And to close something down is devastating to these families. And so you've really, before you open stuff up, I think it's got to be a really well thought out business plan that's got some stress testing to it.
Remember, I brought a request for an additional recruiter to Scott saying we have like a 1 to 90 ratio on recruiter to open requisitions, and had a number of them, and I'm like, and days are open are like going up, it's ballooning, it's going from like 60 days to like 140 days. It goes, so why am I approving this? This is great data for me to say no.
Yeah, so my name is Angel Rosado. I lived in this hospital for a week, actually, about 8, 9 days. Sorry, my name is Angel Rosado. I lived in Children's Hospital for about 8, 9 days in 2021. And I can tell you, it's like a hospital.
Somebody didn't hit the button.
Yeah, the hospital was amazing end to end, like from, and we were in a co-parenting relationship, and the professionalism of your staff. I guess my question is, like, where do you determine, or how do you determine where to invest, right? Because in some ways, like there were some departments that were incredibly amazing, and then there were other ones where the wait time was a little bit longer. Right, but how do you draw that fine line from a feedback point of view on the HR side, and then how do you draw that line from a finance point of view where to spend your dollars on? And I'll tell you, it was the pediatric rheumatologist spot where it was tricky, right? Mm-hmm. And that was sort of like the tipping point for us, where we had to kind of make different decisions at that point. But overall, pretty like diagnosed. Something that would typically take other hospitals a year in 1 week.
Yeah, some of the stuff we do here is absolutely, our caregivers, physicians, nurses, they're absolutely amazing. Why don't you answer on the HR side first, and then I'll go on the finance side.
Yeah, the reality is the vast majority of our opening positions that we're recruiting for actively are clinical positions. And for us, there really isn't much of a differentiator in terms of where we go. So we don't look at what the wait times are that's driving that. The reality is that most of the time the delays are because of a lack of talent, because the market is so tight. Pediatrics by itself is a specialty in the healthcare industry. So there's a lot more adult providers than there are pediatric providers. So we already have a shortened pool. Within pediatrics, you have subspecialties like rheumatology, where the availability of talent is even less. And what's been happening over the last at least 6 years is that fewer and fewer people are going into those subspecialties. A vast number of residency and fellowship positions are going unfilled across the country. Again, you look at the prognosis of that for clinical care for patients that are going to need it is terrifying. It's terrifying. So the delays simply come because we don't have enough predominantly physicians to take care of them, but we do not, it's almost impossible for us to prioritize, well, let's put more resources and get in that pediatric rheumatologist because the wait time is 9 months, which might be the case, actually. I don't think that's an over-exaggeration in some of our clinical areas, unfortunately, versus somebody else that, the wait time is the next day, and because the needs are still going to be there. So unfortunately, from an HR perspective, I say unfortunately, but we do have a team that kind of focuses on all of it simultaneously.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the issues we've got, especially with some of our specialties, where we're the only people in town doing it.
Yeah.
And so, there and particularly for the Medi-Cal population, there's not a lot of hospitals out there wanting to grow their Medi-Cal business. And we've seen, Mamoon was talking a little bit about our market, and that we're a little bit different. Chicago is another city that's got a large children's hospital. Every place else, 90 to 95% of your inpatient visits for inpatient stays are at a children's hospital if you're under 18. Here, I think it's right at 50%, and we've got about 37% of the market, something like that. But you've got a whole lot of adult hospitals are out there doing 0.5% of the market, maybe 1%, and every year 3 or 4 more of them fall out, kind of get out of pediatrics. And so the people willing to provide pediatric care continues to decrease in this city, and that's why you've seen in our ED, there's not a lot of, and this is not rheumatology obviously, but you see our ED volume grow more and more every year, and a lot of it's urgent care. There's not a lot of primary care physicians out there for pediatrics, and so we end up burying that in our ED, which is a horrible place to receive care like that. But it's a tough market in pediatrics, especially in LA, where the market, we're 75% Medicaid. I think the overall population, the pediatric population, is about 70% Medicaid. So it's not like you're going to be able to build a practice on just commercial insurance. So does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, that was great.
Okay.
Hi, a quick question on reporting relationships. Human resources in different companies report all over the place, sometimes to the CFO, sometimes to the CEO, sometimes legal,
Don't give
etc.
him ideas. Please don't give him ideas. The last thing he needs is that idea, please.
So my question to the CFOs are, is there a preference? How would your working relationship be different if in these cases you weren't peers?
I can't imagine in a company of any size where the chief people officer would report, the chief HR person would report to the CFO, especially in an organization like ours where 70% of your expenses are people, and that's everything we do is people related. So in a healthcare organization, I can't imagine that the chief people officer would report to the CFO. I wouldn't want the chief people officer to report to me.
Well, he might want to chief people. He wouldn't want me.
He wouldn't want turnover is expensive.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the scale of the business.
Yeah.
So actually, when I joined Vegamore, I did have HR reporting into me for a period of time, and I think just because as you're growing and you're small and resources are limited, you have a fairly lean structure. So and I think what's really important is you just have to remember that if you're going to get the most out of your HR team if they report into you as a CFO, you cannot just rule a roost in terms of cost management is king. You've got to understand and know what you don't know and be completely open to the fact that there's more to getting the most out of your people than just managing them as a line in the P&L. And I think you have to maintain sight of that. But ultimately, as you grow and scale, I think you have to have that independence to make sure you're getting the most out of your people, for sure.
The hierarchy does indirectly communicate the values of the organization, right? And so I think where you put the reporting structures tells the story to your workforce as well as to your customer base about what's important.
Absolutely, yeah. I was going to say the same because for any of us that have been doing this a long time, I don't know about all of you, but you go into a recession, any sort of economic instability or worry, we see these things change, right? Where they're like, yep, people under finance or people under legal or whatever is going on in the world. And to me, that speaks volumes about that organization's kind of sustainable commitment to culture and people and doing the right thing. So yeah, I like to see that cycle end.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Becky D'Souza, and I had a question that was very similar, but a spinoff of that same question. In your experiences as the CFOs, have you always felt and known the value of HR, or was there an aha moment that you could share with these HR practitioners?
I think I've always valued that role. And I spent 13 years in public accounting, but and I value people there too, obviously. But I've always, and for that matter, it's not just a chief people officer; it's a chief medical officer, it's a chief nursing officer. These organizations don't work unless there's collaboration with all the team members. And I've got a role, and sometimes I have a difference of opinion or whatever the case is. But at the end of the day, I make really very few decisions that are just on my own. I would much rather, if I've got some thoughts around some cost savings or things like that, I'm going to work with my chief clinical officer or my chief medical officer and try to work that through. Because if finance comes in and tries to reduce costs somewhere, it's all about the bottom line. All we care about is the money. If a physician comes in or a nurse comes in, it can be, this is about how we perform better clinical care, more consistent clinical care. And so I think with chief people officer, with anybody else on the executive team, I think that collaboration is really, really important. And I think I've always felt that way.
I think just to build on that, I've been very, very lucky. I think earlier in my career, when I was in a big corporate environment, that I kind of was brought through a system of having a very, very strong HR team. And I think as I became a line manager for the first time, and you encounter so many kind of teething issues when you're a first-time line manager, and having great HR business partners who could help me navigate that, I think that was the aha for me as like a young finance manager of how much value HR brings. So I've been very lucky and blessed to work with some great HR people in my career, and that's really where I have that huge respect for that partnership.
Honestly, my question was pretty similar, but if anybody wants to add anything additional, for the CHROs in particular, how have you successfully convinced CFOs that you needed to be in the room? And anybody else who wants to contribute?
Threatens them? No. No, to be fair, it does come down to having like that valuable relationship. What I've often said is, I find with my CFO partners, we're pretty universally wanting the same things. Like, when you think of the destination, we want the company to win. We want the business to win, the organization to win. And I think those are very aligned. And I kind of remind my CFO partner, like, listen, I think our why is very similar. Even some of our whats are similar. I think where we get off base is on the house. And so what doesn't work is if I'm not in the room to kind of wrestle those things to the ground, it's a problem, because it will come down to the hows. Like, at some point, best laid plans and then execution, there will be a breakdown, and you'll want me to help you carry that weight. So how do we make sure that I'm in the room at the point of decision, and that we're getting that, utmost alignment kind of on why are we doing this, and then what are we going to go do about it? So for me, oftentimes I'll take them aside, let's go get some coffee, let's talk about the kids, and don't leave me out again. But it's been very valuable, and I've had very, very good relationships with my CFOs. It's been good.
Yeah, my entire career has been in healthcare, whether it's adult, pediatrics, academic, and I think healthcare just naturally recognizes the value of people. So from the very early in my career, I haven't had that issue. Really fortunate. I recognize others have, and other industries have. It never made sense to me. I'm like, I don't get it. Why are HR executives struggling to have a seat at the table? Why am I going to conferences where people are talking about this? Like, I never understood the gap. I also had a chance to talk to people in other industries, and then I understood a little bit. I can't empathize, but I understand. I've never had that issue. I've been really fortunate to be in organizations that have always valued the people, because it's the people that drive the engine of clinical care.
I think CHROs are really uniquely placed to actually give feedback to CEOs. And I think that's also a good way to get a seat at the table. Quite often the rest of the functional team don't want to be the one to say, oh, by the way, that meeting wasn't great. So I think as a CHRO, if you can build that trust with the CEO to get a seat at the table just by giving them feedback and making sure that they're, staying on top of their game as well. I think that's a good way of doing it.
Good point.
Probably one more question, if anyone has it. All right, you win.
So I have a question about for Mamoon and everyone, maybe also Jen, about the new last 5 years. Obviously, mental health has been hugely important, and because of that, I think HR has become more visible, and also how you deal with the workforce change by investing wisely with the data on areas that you think is going to have the most return. I'm at banking, so East West Bank is a wonderful growing company that's really thrived in the last 5 years despite the turmoil. We are very rich in benefits, however, have not invested in some of the things that Mamoon you talk about. So I would be curious on what you're going to invest that's going to make 80% women, 80% workforce is women is a huge population. We have 60%. So what is your strategy going forward, living in the 5th generation in the workforce that everyone expects different things? What's your insight going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a challenge. It is such a challenge to bring all that balance into play. But when you speak specifically about mental health, when I first arrived at CHLA 7 years ago, like most of us have an EAP program that we outsource. If you have a mental health issue, call 1-800-mental-health and get the support that you need. We actually have our own in-house employed EAP providers. When I arrived, we had 1. Now we have 8. Thinking about an investment, and they're all busting at the seams still. That's the kind of demand that they have to help process not just work-related issues, but personal life issues that they're coming into work with that they need help to process. It's heartbreaking to say, but suicide rates amongst healthcare workers is on the rise, and we've just got to do something about it. It's a real mess. Again, the healthcare industry has a lot of challenges to overcome, and that's one of them. So that's one of the meaningful investments that we're making. Not just on one-on-one therapeutic relationships, but creating a culture and an environment that allows to destigmatize, concerns around mental health and suicidal inclinations and all of. So there's a lot of work that we've done over the last 3 years, particularly to help drive that. We've hired a chief wellness officer who kind of excels in this space. So that's one of the areas around mental health, but wellness in general that we've made a lot of investments in. When it comes to the idea of the multi-generational workforce, where it's predominantly millennial and women for us, that's something we're working on strategically right now, is to modernize our total reward program. Right? It was built 60 years ago for a predominantly boomer generation that Gen X kind of aligned with to a large degree. Millennials and Gen Zs don't care a lot of what the benefits that we have to offer. The challenge becomes that it's so needed to customize, it's almost cost prohibitive to offer all of it. So I think most of us are looking at defined contribution type benefit plans and just kind of figuring out how to invest the money for people to have choices, but those choices to be cost effective enough where you have enough of a population to drive those costs down. Right? So it's just an intricate balance that I haven't figured out how to solve yet for CHLA at least, but we're working the numbers and trying to figure that out. Hope that helps.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed tonight. Andrew, I hope we did you proud in kicking off this series. And I want to thank all of the panelists for just being you. So we appreciate you.
Can you hear me? All right, one more time for Scott, Mamoon, Darren, and Jen. That was fantastic. I think that was a great way to launch the engaging finance session. The questions around the CFO, reporting to the CFO, not that my experience really pales in comparison to anybody on the panel. I would just say in the last 20 years, what I've seen is there's 3 type of organizations. There's the organization that inherently just engages the CHRO and the CPO as an executive, and they have the same salary, bonus, perks, equity. There's the organization, whether it's a PE firm or CEO or CFO that isn't sure, and then you go to them as a CHRO, CPO with data, and you have a conversation that's based in data, and then they understand why and what your value is. And then there's the organization that just is never going to engage or provide you that type of partnership. And in the mid-market, that's probably more what you're going to find than in the large market. And California is a mid-market state. So, if you're in transition and you're searching, you're going to have to really seek that out during the interview process. When I talk to CHROs and are in transition, I always ask them if they ask for finances during an interview process. And the answer is always no. And those that have said, how do you think that would go over? I'm like, well, depending on the answer, you're gonna know whether or not you're going to be a real partner of theirs. So, anyways, my 2 cents. Not that they matter. Again, thank you, Jen. Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Mamoon. Thank you, Scott. This is absolutely fantastic, CHLA. We really appreciate you.